Welcome, and settle yourself into comfort. Let your body grow heavy, your breathing steady, and your thoughts loosen their hold on the present. Wrap yourself in a soft blanket, make sure you are cozy, and perhaps take a moment to press that little subscribe button if you enjoy wandering softly through history. You might also leave a gentle comment below, telling us where you are tuning in from, so we can quietly imagine this journey together with listeners from all around the world. Tonight we will take a slow walk back into the Middle Ages, where love, marriage, and the human heart were understood in ways both familiar and strange. In medieval times, the heart was seen not only as the organ that gave life, but as the very centre of reason, truth, and emotion. To speak of the heart was to speak of honesty, loyalty, and the deepest commitments between people. Yet, as we shall see, real life was often far less poetic than the songs and stories suggest. Over the course of this journey, we will drift through daily life in the Middle Ages, exploring how people thought about the heart, about love, and about marriage. We will meet stories of knights and noble ladies, rules of the church, and the quiet lives of peasants whose hopes were simpler, though no less important. This is not a tale of excitement, but of quiet detail. Let yourself imagine the sound of medieval bells in the distance, the gentle flicker of a candle in a cold stone room, or the murmur of voices in a small village church. Our path will be unhurried, our voice calm, and our journey long enough to let you sink gently into rest. Let us begin with the way people of that time understood the heart itself. The medieval heart. In medieval society, people believed that the heart and the mind were not separate, but deeply connected. The heart was thought to guide thought and reason, not just emotion. It was not only the place of love, but also the seat of truth. Imagine a medieval scholar sitting in a dimly lit room, parchment spread before him, a quill scratching across the page. He writes of the heart as the origin of every action. Without the heart, no thought could form, no decision could be made. The steady beat within the chest was more than a rhythm of life. It was a sign of honesty, loyalty, and the hidden self. Because of this belief, the heart became a symbol in daily life. To give one's heart meant to offer truth. To speak from the heart was to speak sincerely. A popular proverb of the time said that, "What the heart thinks, the mouth speaks." This saying shaped how people understood not only friendship, but love, marriage, and duty. We can picture how this might feel in ordinary life. A villager making a promise to a neighbour might press his hand to his chest, showing that the vow came from the heart. A knight kneeling before a lady might declare that his heart was hers, meaning not only affection, but also loyalty and service. The language of the heart shaped both the lofty world of nobility and the everyday world of peasants. It is also worth remembering that medieval medicine tied the heart to every part of the body. Physicians of the time believed that the heart pumped not only blood, but also the vital spirits that gave energy to thought and feeling. If someone was dishonest, it was sometimes said that his heart had grown weak or clouded. If someone was brave, he was described as having a strong heart. This way of thinking created a world where love, faith, and truth were always measured by the heart. In marriage, to join hearts was seen as more than a poetic image. It was thought of as a binding of minds, bodies, and souls together under God. And yet, as we will discover in later parts, real life did not always follow these noble ideas. While the heart was honoured as a symbol of truth and loyalty, marriages could be arranged for power, women could be forced, and church rules often made love more complicated than simple devotion. But before we move further, let us stay with this first image. Imagine yourself in the quiet of a medieval chapel. The air is cool, thick with the faint scent of stone and candle wax. You place your hand over your chest and feel the steady rhythm of your heart. In this world, that beat is more than life itself. It is the source of thought, of truth, and of love. Proverbs, chivalry, and noble love. Naturally, this belief in the heart as the source of truth shaped how people thought about love, sex, and marriage. To speak of love was to speak of the heart, and to speak of the heart was to speak of honesty and loyalty. One famous proverb of the Middle Ages told people, "That which the heart thinks, the mouth speaks." It was a reminder that true words came from deep within, and that lies could not last. If the heart was pure, the speech would be pure. If the heart was troubled, words would soon reveal it. Alongside these sayings, medieval culture was filled with stories that guided how people imagined love. These stories did not always match reality, but they created ideals that shaped behavior, especially among the nobles. Chivalry, the code of conduct for knights, was not just about fighting or loyalty to a king. It was also about how a man should treat a lady. Imagine a court hall in a castle. Tapestries hang along the walls, showing scenes of hunting or of saints. At the centre sits a noble lady, dressed in fine cloth, her hair covered with a veil. A knight enters, bowing low, and declares his service to her. He promises to honour her, to protect her, and to dedicate his victories to her name. This was the language of chivalry. But there was something curious about this idea of noble love. In the stories told through poems and songs, called romances, the knight and the lady were rarely husband and wife. Their love was distant, often secret, and based on admiration rather than marriage or physical closeness. The knight might long for the lady, but he was expected to prove his devotion through service, not through touch. This kind of love was known later as courtly love. It was celebrated in ballads sung by troubadours, in verses written by poets, and in tales shared at noble courts. It was love as a form of art, something refined, noble, and often tragic. For example, in many of these tales, the knight suffers for love, showing his strength not in battle alone, but in patience and longing. The lady might remain distant, almost unreachable, yet her presence gives meaning to the knight's actions. This was not about marriage or children. It was about loyalty, admiration, and the beauty of unfulfilled desire. To people today, this may seem strange, but in the medieval world, it allowed men and women to explore emotions in a society where real marriage was usually a practical arrangement. Courtly love became a way to imagine a different world, one where the heart could speak freely, even if life did not allow it. These ideals did not only stay in stories, they influenced how people behaved. Knights were expected to show respect to women, to be polite and self-controlled, even if reality was often harsher. Ladies could sometimes use the language of these romances to claim dignity or influence, pointing out that true knights must treat them with honour. And so, while the heart was seen as the centre of truth, and while marriage was often about property or power, this tradition of chivalry offered another path. It spoke of love as something noble, spiritual, and refined. It promised that devotion could be pure, even if it was never fulfilled. As we drift further, we will see how these stories spread across Europe, shaping not only the dreams of nobles, but also the everyday understanding of love. From castles to villages, the ideals of courtly love and the sayings of the heart shaped how people thought, even if daily life was far more practical. Knights, ladies, and the stories of courtly love. Stories of knights and ladies filled the medieval world. They were sung by troubadours in noble halls, recited by poets, and sometimes even read aloud in monasteries where monks copied the manuscripts. These stories painted vivid pictures of honour, loyalty, and distant affection. Imagine yourself sitting in the great hall of a castle. The fire burns low in the hearth, and the long wooden tables are cleared of the evening meal. A minstrel stands at one end of the room, holding a lute, his voice carrying gently through the air. He sings of a knight who rode into battle not for wealth, not for land, but for the smile of his lady. The hall listens in quiet respect, knowing that this is how noble love should be imagined. These romances were not really about marriage, nor were they about family life. Instead, they told of admiration so strong that it could inspire heroic deeds. A knight might spend years serving a lady who remained far above his reach, perhaps already married to another, or perhaps bound by duty. The distance was part of the beauty. Love was most noble when it was not fulfilled. One of the most famous examples was the story of Lancelot and Queen Guinevere, though it was often told in whispered tones. Lancelot, the bravest knight of King Arthur's court, was said to love the queen with all his heart. Yet that love was dangerous, forbidden, and could never truly be realized without betrayal. Their longing was tragic, but also noble in its suffering. Such tales may sound strange to us, but to the medieval mind they carried lessons. They showed that true love was not about pleasure or marriage contracts, but about loyalty, devotion, and sacrifice. A knight who loved with purity of heart was considered honourable, even if he never held the lady's hand. We should not imagine, however, that all knights lived this way. Real knights could be rough, violent, and self-serving. The songs and poems created ideals, not descriptions of daily life. They gave nobles something to aspire to, a vision of refinement and courtesy in a world that could often be harsh. These romances also shaped how women were viewed. Ladies in these stories often held great power over men. A single glance, a word, or a token of favour could inspire years of service. While this power was mostly symbolic, it gave women in noble circles a voice, at least within the imagined world of poetry and song. Yet the gap between this ideal and the reality was wide. Many noble women were married off for alliances, with little say in their future. Still, the language of courtly love gave them a kind of dignity. They could remind men that true knights must treat women with honour, patience, and respect. Courtly love, then, was both fantasy and influence. It did not change the fact that most marriages were arranged for wealth or politics, but it offered another vision of what love could be, at least in dreams and stories. It reminded people that the heart, thought to be the seat of truth, could also be the seat of noble devotion. And so, as troubadours moved from court to court, carrying their songs and tales, they spread not only entertainment, but also ideals. Love, in their verses, was elevated, refined, and purified. It became something greater than daily life, something worth longing for, even if it could never be fully held. Courtly love and women's influence. Historians suggest that this culture of courtly love gave noble women a subtle kind of influence in their households. In a world where most power rested in the hands of men, the language of chivalry allowed women to claim a higher place, at least within the ideals of romance. Imagine a noble lady seated in her solar, the private upper chamber of a castle. Sunlight filters through narrow windows covered with oiled parchment or thin glass. She listens as a poet reads verses, praising her beauty and virtue. In these words, she is not silent or passive. She is the one who grants favour, who chooses to smile, or who withholds a token of approval. Knights are expected to serve her, and she is portrayed as the source of their honour. This did not mean that noble women truly commanded their households through romance. Their lives were still bound by duty, marriage arrangements, and family demands. Yet, when men praised women as the keepers of virtue, women could sometimes use that language to gain respect or negotiate greater say in household matters. For example, if a husband was absent on campaign or managing lands far away, a wife might step in to oversee the estate. Documents survive showing noble women collecting rents, managing servants, and even defending castles in times of need. While such roles were not common, they were accepted as part of noble responsibility, and the ideals of courtly love made it easier for women to be seen as worthy of honour. Among wealthy townsfolk, especially in merchant families, women could also play important roles. Some ran shops, managed accounts, or worked alongside their husbands in trades. In places where literacy was growing, educated women sometimes wrote letters, kept household books, or even copied manuscripts. The respect paid to ladies in stories of courtly love may have helped support these roles, even if only indirectly. Yet it is important to note that these benefits rarely extended to poor women. Peasant women worked hard in the fields, cared for animals, baked bread, spun wool, and raised children, but the songs of knights and ladies rarely spoke of them. For most women, life remained tied to survival, and the ideals of chivalry were distant dreams belonging to another world. Even so, the idea that women could be honoured, admired, and even obeyed shaped how love was imagined. It reminded people that the heart, seen as the centre of truth, could also be a source of power, not just for men, but for women as well. In this way, the world of courtly love did not only offer noble amusement, it created space, however small, for women to claim dignity in a society where they were often overlooked. The songs of knights and poets lifted women's image, even if reality did not always match. Marriage as a business deal. Outside of romantic literature and the gentle songs of troubadours, marriage itself was usually something far more practical. For most noble and wealthy families, it was not about affection or even companionship. Marriage was a business deal, a contract carefully arranged to bring together land, power, and wealth. Imagine the hall of a great castle, not filled with music, but with serious discussion. A father sits with his advisors, speaking not of love, but of fields, titles, and inheritances. Another family sends a messenger with a list of lands or dowries. The question is not whether the young couple like each other, but whether their union will strengthen the families. For nobles, marriage was a way to bind families together. If one lord's daughter married another lord's son, the two families became allies. Their lands might be joined, their armies united, their influence in the region increased. Marriage, in this sense, was a tool of strategy. Young people in these circles often had little say in the matter. A daughter might be told whom she would marry, sometimes without even meeting her future husband until the wedding day. A son, too, could be expected to agree to a match that his family had chosen. Even when they met beforehand, their interactions were usually watched and controlled to prevent scandal or secrets. In some cases, marriage contracts were drawn up years in advance, when the children were still very young. Families might arrange future unions as soon as babies were born, with the hope that when the children grew, the agreement would still serve both sides. This does not mean that love was entirely absent. Sometimes affection grew after the wedding. Sometimes couples found companionship, trust, and even joy together. But the main purpose was rarely personal happiness. It was stability, property, and honour. The ceremony itself reflected this. When noble marriages were celebrated, there were banquets, music, and dancing, but all of it served as a public display of wealth and unity between families. The bride and groom were at the centre, yet the meaning of the event lay in the alliances created around them. Even among wealthy merchants and townsfolk, marriage was often arranged with business in mind. A marriage might link two trading families, secure investments, or expand influence within the town council. For families rising into wealth, marrying into an older noble house could bring status. To us today, this may feel distant from the language of the heart. But in medieval times, the heart and the family were not separate. What was good for the family's standing was considered good for the individual. Personal feelings were often expected to yield to duty. And so, while poets sang of distant romances and troubadours praised the purity of love, the reality of marriage for the upper classes was shaped by contracts, negotiations, and careful plans. Behind the vows, behind the feasts, there was always the quiet exchange of power and property, love and marriage among peasants. In contrast to the carefully arranged marriages of nobles and wealthy merchants, peasants often had more freedom in choosing whom they married. Since most families in villages owned little land and had few possessions to trade, there was less pressure to treat marriage as a business contract. Imagine a small village at the edge of a field. The houses are made of wood and thatch, smoke curling from low chimneys. A young man and woman meet while tending sheep or drawing water from the well. Their conversations are short, sometimes shy, but they grow to know each other through the daily rhythm of work. When they decide to marry, the choice often comes from affection, not from a written contract. Still, even for peasants, marriage was not always simple. In some cases, they needed permission from their lord to marry. Lords wanted to keep control of their tenants, and might refuse a marriage if it meant losing labour or moving people between estates. For example, if a woman from one manor wished to marry a man from another, the lord might demand a payment before allowing it. Many peasants never had a formal wedding ceremony at all. The exchange of land or wealth that defined noble marriages mattered little to them. What mattered most was spoken consent, the simple promise of "I take you," made before God and before witnesses. Sometimes this was enough, with or without a priest. For those who did marry formally, love was often a stronger reason than duty. A ring, a token, or even the public joining of hands might serve as the symbol of their union. Afterwards, the couple would continue their daily labour together, raising children, tending animals, and managing small plots of land. But it is also true that many peasants never married at all. Poverty, illness, or the constant struggle for survival meant that not everyone could find or keep a partner. In such cases, families and neighbours provided the web of support, and the idea of marriage remained more flexible than the strict contracts of the noble world. What we see then is a contrast. For the wealthy, marriage was a matter of politics, strategy, and alliances. For peasants, marriage could be a matter of affection, companionship, or simply the need to share labour and survive together. In both worlds, however, the heart remained central, whether spoken in noble halls or whispered in village lanes. To give one's heart meant to promise loyalty. And in the Middle Ages, loyalty was the root of love, whether born of strategy or of choice, the age of marriage. One surprising part of medieval marriage was how young people could be when it happened. According to church law, girls were considered old enough to marry at the age of 12, while boys could marry at 14. To us today, this feels shockingly early, yet in the Middle Ages it was accepted as the natural order. We should imagine that not every marriage took place so young. Many couples, especially peasants, married later, often in their late teens or early 20s, once they had enough resources to start a household. But among the nobility, where family alliances were carefully planned, it was common for marriages to be arranged as soon as the children reached the legal age. Picture a noble girl of 12 years, dressed in a fine gown for her wedding. She may never have met her husband until the ceremony itself. The vows are spoken in Latin, the church bells ring, and suddenly she is expected to begin her new life as a wife. Her childhood has ended quickly, replaced with adult responsibilities. For boys, though the legal age was 14, many did not marry until later. Young men often needed time to inherit land, finish training as a knight, or establish themselves in a trade. A noble boy of 14 might be formally married, but his household would sometimes not begin until he was older and more secure. Legends even grew around marriage customs. One story, though not proven true, claimed that in 1228 women in Scotland gained the right to propose marriage themselves. The tale says that if a man refused such a proposal, he had to pay a fine. Historians doubt this was ever more than a romantic myth, but its survival shows how people like to imagine different possibilities within the rules of marriage. For most, however, the rules were firm. Childhood ended quickly. Marriage could be arranged and sealed before a person had much say in the matter. Life expectancy was shorter, and families believed it was important to secure alliances, children, and households as soon as possible. The thought may feel harsh to us, but in their world, it was practical. Survival depended on family ties, and marriage was the way to secure them. Marriage as a holy sacrament. The church played a central role in shaping how people thought about marriage. It was not just a social agreement or a family contract, but a sacred act. The Church described marriage as a holy sacrament, one of the most important steps in a Christian's life. What is interesting, however, is that the rules were more flexible than many people today might imagine. In the early and high Middle Ages, a priest was not always required for a marriage to be valid. The essential part was spoken consent. If two people said clearly and freely, "I take you," or "Yes, I do," before God and witnesses, the Church recognized their union as binding. This meant that marriage could sometimes take place almost anywhere. It might happen in a church before the altar, but it could also happen in a field, at the edge of a road, or even at home. The location mattered far less than the exchange of words. To strengthen the promise, couples often gave one another a small token. This was sometimes called a Wednesday. The most common token was a ring, but it could also be another object of value, such as a belt, a coin, or even a piece of clothing. What mattered was not the object itself, but the meaning it carried as a sign of lasting promise. In this way, the Church focused on the idea that marriage was a bond of consent. No great feast, no large ceremony, not even a priest was absolutely necessary. The words of the couple, spoken truthfully, were enough. Over time, however, the Church began to push for more formal ceremonies. Priests encouraged couples to marry at the church door or inside the church, where the union could be properly blessed and witnessed by the community. These ceremonies gave more control to church leaders and made it easier to prevent secret or disputed marriages. But even with these changes, the heart of the matter remained the same. A marriage was not only an agreement between families. It was, above all, the spoken consent of two people, given in faith before God. Imagine a quiet village wedding. There is no feast, no music, only a bride and groom standing at the church door, hands joined. A small ring is slipped onto the finger. The words are spoken, clear and simple. In the eyes of their neighbours and in the eyes of God, the bond is complete. Rings and symbols of union. The exchange of rings in marriage feels ancient to us, and in truth, it was already a familiar symbol in the Middle Ages. A ring was more than a pretty ornament. It was a sign of binding, a circle with no beginning and no end, representing eternity. When a groom placed a ring on the bride's finger, it was a way of saying, "This promise has no ending." Not everyone could afford gold or silver rings. Peasants often used simple iron or bronze rings instead, and in some cases, the token of marriage was not a ring at all. A belt, a knife, a coin, or even a piece of clothing might serve the same purpose. What mattered was not the wealth of the object, but the meaning of giving and receiving. The ring was also connected with law and property. Just as a ring sealed a contract or an oath, it sealed the bond of marriage. This meant that rings were not only romantic, they were practical. They carried the weight of both affection and legal promise. In noble weddings, rings could be decorated with stones or engraved with words. Some bore religious symbols, such as a cross, while others carried personal phrases, often in Latin or French. These inscriptions worked as reminders of loyalty and love. The act of placing the ring was symbolic too. The groom would usually place it on the bride's left hand, on the fourth finger. This finger was believed to contain a direct vein to the heart, sometimes called the vena amoris, or vein of love. Though the idea is not scientifically true, it was believed strongly enough to shape a custom that continues even today. For villagers who could not afford jewellery, symbols were simpler. They might mark their union by joining hands, by eating together at a shared table, or by exchanging gifts of food or fabric. These small gestures carried the same meaning of permanence. In all cases, the objects were less important than the action. The giving of a ring or token was a physical reminder of words already spoken. It showed to the world that two people had bound themselves together, and that bond was meant to last for life, feasts and celebrations. Once the vows were spoken, the next step in many marriages was celebration. For peasants, this might mean little more than a shared meal with bread, ale, and perhaps a roasted chicken if the family could afford it. For nobles, however, weddings could turn into grand feasts that lasted for days. Imagine the great hall of a castle filled with torches and music. Long wooden tables groan under the weight of roasted meat, pies, bread, and spiced wine. Minstrels play, jugglers perform, and guests raise their cups to toast the new couple. For the nobility, a wedding was not only a union of two people, but also a public display of power, wealth, and alliances. Even in villages, though on a smaller scale, marriage was often followed by dancing, music, and communal meals. Neighbours would come together, bringing food or drink to share. This was not just generosity, but also a way of showing approval for the union. One curious tradition in some parts of Europe was called the bedding ceremony. After the feast, the couple might be led to their bedchamber by friends and family, who sometimes even witnessed them being placed in bed together. This was meant to prove the marriage was real and complete. In truth, the couple was often left alone soon after, but the ritual showed how much importance was placed on the physical joining of husband and wife. Of course, not every family could afford a feast. Many peasants had little beyond the essentials of life. In their case, the celebration might be nothing more than ale, shared with close kin and neighbours, accompanied by simple songs. But even this was meaningful, for it marked the beginning of a household and the joining of two families. So whether in a smoky village tavern or a glittering noble hall, the purpose was the same. A wedding feast declared to the community that the couple was united, that the bond was recognised, and that all should now honour the new husband and wife. Dowries and bride prices. Behind the vows and feasts, there were practical matters that shaped medieval marriage. One of the most important was money or property. Marriages were not only about love or companionship, they were also about the exchange of wealth and responsibility. A bride's family often gave a dowry. This could be money, land, livestock, or goods such as clothing, tools, or furniture. The dowry helped the new household survive, but it also gave security to the bride. If she was widowed, the dowry might support her. In noble families, dowries could be vast, sometimes entire estates, used to strengthen alliances between powerful houses. In some regions, instead of a dowry, there was what was called a bride price. This meant the groom or his family gave payment to the bride's family, a recognition of the value of losing a daughter's labour and presence. The details varied widely across Europe, but the principle was the same. Marriage involved economic arrangements that went beyond the couple themselves. There was also something called a dower, which was different from a dowry. A dower was a promise made by the groom, ensuring that if he died, his wife would still have property or income to live on. In this way, the law tried to protect a widow from being left with nothing. Even for peasants, these practices mattered. A dowry might be a single cow, a chest of linen, or a few acres of land. Though small compared to noble estates, these gifts were essential for survival. For the poor, a cow meant milk, cheese, and calves. A plot of land meant food for the table. So, while the poetry of love and the blessing of the church were central to marriage, the exchange of goods and promises formed its foundation in daily life. To marry was to form a household, and a household needed resources. In the end, marriage was both holy and practical. It bound hearts together, but it also tied together money, land, and survival. The church's blessing. By the High Middle Ages, the church had become the main authority over marriage. Priests were expected to bless unions, and over time, marriage itself came to be seen as one of the 7 holy sacraments. This gave it deep spiritual weight. A priest's role was not only to witness, but also to ensure that the couple was free to marry. He asked questions such as, were they too closely related by blood or kinship? had either already made a vow of chastity or joined a religious order? Was there any legal obstacle? These questions were taken seriously, for a marriage that broke church law could be declared invalid. The blessing itself was usually given during a mass or at the church door. The couple would stand before the priest, sometimes outside the entrance, so that the community could gather and see. After the vows and exchange of tokens, the priest blessed the union with holy water and prayers. The presence of the church also gave marriage a new meaning. It was not only a personal choice or a family arrangement, it became a pathway to holiness. Husbands and wives were expected to live faithfully, to raise children in the faith, and to honor God through their union. For peasants, the church's blessing was also a shield against gossip or dispute. If a marriage was blessed, no one could easily question it. It had both divine and social approval. For nobles, a church ceremony was equally important, for it confirmed their unions as legitimate in the eyes of God and law. Still, the church did not erase local traditions. Many couples combined Christian prayers with older customs, such as hand fasting, feasts, or dances. The sacred and the communal blended together, creating ceremonies that were both holy and human. In this way, the church's blessing anchored marriage, turning private promises into a public, lifelong sacrament. Marriage and social status. Marriage in the Middle Ages was not just about two individuals. It was also about where they stood in society. A peasant's marriage was very different from that of a noble, and both were different again from that of a king or queen. For peasants, marriage was mostly practical. A husband and wife worked together to farm, raise animals, and keep the household running. Children were needed to help with labour, so marriage was tied closely to survival. A good match might simply mean finding someone healthy, hard-working, and able to manage daily life. For nobles, marriage was less about personal choice and more about alliances. Families used marriage to secure land, forge peace, or gain political power. A daughter's hand might be promised years before she was old enough to wed, and sons were expected to marry in ways that strengthened the family's influence. Kings and queens faced the highest stakes of all. Their marriages could decide the fate of entire kingdoms. Wars were sometimes avoided or started because of royal marriages. A queen's dowry could be a province, a city, or even an army. A prince's bride might bring ties to foreign rulers. In this way, royal weddings were less about love and more about diplomacy. Still, across all levels of society, marriage carried status. To be married meant being recognized as a full adult. For women, it gave a defined place, whether as a housewife, noble lady, or queen. For men, it proved readiness to lead a household or rule lands. Remaining single was unusual, though priests, monks, and nuns were exceptions. So while every marriage joined two lives, it also echoed through families, villages, and even nations. Marriage was personal, but it was also political and social, shaping not only households but entire communities. Consent and choice. Today, many people think of marriage as a matter of love and free choice, but in the Middle Ages, things were more complicated. The Church taught that true marriage required the free consent of both bride and groom. In theory, no one could be forced. In practice, however, pressure was common. Families, especially noble ones, arranged matches to secure land or power. Young people were expected to obey. Some marriages were promised when the bride and groom were still children, though the union itself was delayed until they were older. For peasants, there was usually more freedom, but even here, choice was shaped by need. A daughter might marry a man who owned land or had tools, because this secured her future. A son might marry a woman with a good dowry, because it strengthened his household. Personal attraction mattered, but survival often came first. Despite these pressures, there are records of people resisting. Court cases survive where brides claimed they had been forced, and sometimes marriages were annulled for lack of consent. The Church's emphasis on agreement gave couples at least some protection, even if family authority was strong. One curious detail is that secret marriages, though frowned upon, were still considered valid if both parties freely gave consent. This worried the Church because such unions bypassed family approval and created disputes. For this reason, priests were encouraged to perform public ceremonies so the whole community could witness the vows. So while consent was a principle, the reality was often shaped by duty, family, and survival. A medieval couple's choice was not always their own, but their voices were not entirely silenced either. Forbidden marriages. Not every match was allowed in the Middle Ages. The Church set rules about who could marry, and these rules were strict. One of the biggest restrictions involved kinship. People who were related within several degrees were forbidden to Wednesday. At certain times, this rule was stretched so wide that distant cousins were blocked from marrying. The idea was that close blood ties made a marriage improper, even dangerous to the soul. The Church counted kinship not only by blood, but also by spiritual ties. For example, a godparent and godchild could not marry, since baptism created a sacred bond like family. These restrictions were especially important for nobles, who often intermarried to keep land within their circles. Many noble couples needed special permission, called a dispensation, from the Pope or a bishop to make their unions legal. Without it, their children might be declared illegitimate, which had serious consequences for inheritance. Other bans also existed. A person could not marry someone already married, of course, since bigamy was forbidden. Priests, monks, and nuns could not marry at all, since their vows placed them outside family life. In some places, widows were discouraged from remarrying, though many still did. Despite these rules, human desires often clashed with law. Records show cases of cousins marrying in secret, nobles pushing for dispensations, and couples accused of breaking the boundaries. The Church's courts spent much time untangling such disputes. These restrictions remind us that marriage was seen as more than a contract. It was spiritual, social, and moral. Breaking the rules was not just a family matter. It was an offense against God and the community. Dowries and bride prices. When we think about marriage today, we usually picture love, promises, maybe rings, and a special day filled with food, music, and dancing. In the Middle Ages, all of those things might still appear. But behind the surface was something far less romantic. Money, property, and negotiations. A medieval marriage was not only the joining of two people, it was also the joining of families, resources, and fortunes. And one of the clearest ways this played out was through the exchange of dowries and bride prices. Let's begin with the idea of a dowry. In many places across medieval Europe, a bride was expected to bring with her a collection of goods, wealth, or land into the marriage. This dowry was not meant as a gift to her husband in the sense of generosity, but as a practical support. It helped set up the new household, and it also acted as a kind of safety net for the woman. If the marriage ended through death, annulment, or abandonment, she or her family could sometimes claim back part of the dowry. Dowries could range from modest to extraordinary. For peasant families, a dowry might be simple and humble, a cow perhaps, or a few chickens, maybe a set of cooking pots, or some tools that would help the couple farm their land. These items might seem small, but in a world where survival depended on hard labor and shared resources, they were life-changing. One cow meant milk every day. A plough could mean more food for the family. A sturdy chest of clothing or blankets meant warmth during the long winters. For noble families, dowries were a whole different story. Here, we are talking about sums of money so large that they could shift the balance of power between kingdoms. A noblewoman's dowry might include estates, castles, entire villages, or rights to collect taxes from certain lands. Imagine marrying not just a person, but suddenly gaining control over hundreds of farmers and acres of fertile soil. It was less like a wedding and more like a political merger. This is why noble families took dowries very seriously. A daughter was often seen as a way to strengthen alliances, and her dowry was the tool to make that alliance appealing. In Italy, especially during the late Middle Ages, dowries grew so costly that many families struggled to afford them. Records survive of fathers bankrupting themselves to marry off their daughters to wealthy or powerful men. Some daughters never married at all because the family could not raise enough money to make a match possible. In such cases, girls were sometimes sent to convents instead, since becoming a nun was often cheaper than paying for a wedding. Now, let's look at the other side of the arrangement, the bride price, also called a dower or a mourning gift in some regions. In this custom, it was the groom who provided wealth to the bride or her family. This could be a symbolic payment, meant to show he was capable of supporting a household, or it could be substantial, especially if the bride came from a respected family. In some cultures, the bride price was given directly to the bride herself. This made it her personal property, something she could keep even if the marriage ended. In other cases, the payment went to her father or family as compensation for losing a daughter's labour in the household. From the family's perspective, raising a daughter meant years of feeding, clothing, and protecting her. The bride price helped balance that investment. It is worth noting that in many medieval societies, both dowry and bride price existed together. Wealth moved in both directions. The bride brought something into the marriage, the groom provided something in return, and the two families became linked not just by ceremony, but by tangible exchanges. It was a little like business negotiations conducted in the language of kinship. But these financial customs did not always work smoothly. They could create tensions, delays, or even disputes that ended up in court. For example, what if a groom accepted a dowry but then abandoned the bride? Could her family claim it back? What if a groom promised a large bride price but failed to pay? Could the bride still be considered properly married? These questions were not simply personal. They had legal consequences because property was at stake, and medieval courts were often filled with such cases. Let's pause for a moment to imagine the scene of a peasant wedding in a small village. The bride arrives with her dowry, a few tools, maybe a spinning wheel, perhaps a cow led by a rope. The groom's family offers a bride price, maybe in coins or in the form of labour, like helping the bride's parents repair their roof or plough their field. Everyone in the village knows what is being exchanged because these deals are not hidden. The community watches, nods, and witnesses the joining of two households. This way, if disputes arise later, everyone remembers what was given and what was promised. Now imagine a noble wedding, say in 14th century France. A princess is married to a foreign prince. Her dowry includes several provinces, rich lands with rivers, forests, and towns. The bride price offered by the prince's family might include soldiers, gold, or even political guarantees. The wedding itself is filled with music and feasting, but beneath the surface, it is all about treaties and power. The bride herself may have little say in the matter. She becomes the living link that binds two dynasties. Sometimes, the sheer size of dowries led to dark consequences. In late medieval Italy, where dowries were crucial to marriage arrangements, families with too many daughters often found themselves desperate. In some cases, girls were left unmarried, sent to convents, or married off to much older men who accepted smaller payments. Some scholars argue that the heavy burden of dowries even influenced family planning, leading to smaller families among the wealthy, since too many daughters could financially ruin a household. But dowries and bride prices were not just about money. They also carried symbolism. The cow given as a dowry symbolized fertility and nourishment. The mourning gift, often a piece of land given by the groom, symbolized his promise to care for his wife. Even small items carried meaning. A chest filled with linen was more than cloth. It represented the wife's role in maintaining the household. We should also remember that these traditions were not identical everywhere. In Northern Europe, the custom of the morning gift was strong, while in Southern Europe, dowries dominated. In England, both systems blended. Across cultures, the exact practice shifted, but the principle remained. Marriage was both personal and economic, and wealth flowed alongside vows. From a modern point of view, this may sound cold. We might imagine medieval couples as pawns in a game of property and politics, but we should not assume that love and affection never grew. Many couples did grow close, raising children together, working side by side, and developing bonds of trust and loyalty. Yet, it is important to remember that the foundation of the marriage, especially at the moment of union, often rested on these exchanges of wealth. Let me tell you one more small story, drawn from a medieval record. In a German village in the 15th century, a young bride brought her dowry of simple items: a bed, a pot, some linen, and a cow. Her husband's family offered her a morning gift of a small field by the river. The whole village witnessed it. Years later, when the husband died, the woman was able to keep that field because it had been given to her directly. She used it to grow food for her children. Without that gift, she might have been left with nothing. The system, though imperfect, sometimes gave women a little protection. In the end, dowries and bride prices remind us that marriage in the Middle Ages was never just private. It was an arrangement seen by families, neighbours, lords, and priests. It was tied to survival, to status, and to the constant movement of wealth in a society where property meant power. Behind every feast and vow was a set of negotiations, carefully balanced, shaping not only two lives, but often entire communities. Annulments and legal exceptions. In the medieval world, marriage was meant to last a lifetime. It was sacred, binding, and, in theory, indissoluble. Yet there were circumstances under which the Church allowed marriages to be annulled, meaning declared invalid from the start. These annulments were not common, but they reveal how medieval people understood the limits of consent, legality, and human imperfection. One of the clearest reasons for annulment involved kinship. The Church forbade marriage between close relatives, but the rules could be complex. Siblings and first cousins were clearly prohibited, yet degrees of relationship could stretch across several generations. The logic was that marrying close kin endangered both the spiritual and social order. Clergy monitored marriages carefully, and if a couple was discovered to be too closely related, their union could be annulled. This sometimes happened years after the wedding if new information came to light. Another reason for annulment was prior religious vows. A monk, nun, or even a man who had taken private vows of chastity could not enter a valid marriage. The Church viewed such vows as a binding promise to God, and breaking them was considered a violation of divine law. In these cases, the marriage could be annulled because the parties had lacked the full freedom to consent. The Church also recognized cases in which consent had been compromised. If someone had been forced into marriage or misled about the circumstances, they could petition for annulment. A young woman promised to marry a man under pressure from her family, or a bride misinformed about her husband's identity, could request the marriage be declared invalid. Though the process was difficult and often required legal hearings, it existed as a safeguard against complete injustice. Some annulments seem unusual to modern eyes. For instance, failure to produce a male heir was not considered grounds for annulment. Families might have hoped for sons, certainly, but daughters were accepted as God's gift. In contrast, if a husband could not perform his marital duties, the marriage might be annulled. Sexual capability, in this context, was seen as part of a man's responsibility. If he could not satisfy his wife, and this was confirmed by a council or inquiry, the marriage could be dissolved. The process of annulment itself was careful and procedural. Church officials, sometimes bishops or councils of priests, investigated claims thoroughly. They asked questions, gathered testimony, and examined the circumstances. These inquiries could take months or even years. The aim was not scandal or punishment, but clarity. Was this union truly valid in the eyes of God and law, or was there a hidden reason that prevented its legitimacy from the start? Annulments were rare, but their existence highlights an important truth about medieval marriage. Despite all the rules, arrangements, dowries, and ceremonies, the Church recognized that some marriages simply could not fulfill their purpose. Consent, capability, and legality mattered, even in a world governed by family obligations and social expectations. Consider a noble couple married for strategic reasons. They may have been perfect on paper: large dowry, political alliance, prestigious lineage. But if one partner could not physically or emotionally fulfill the marriage, the union might be annulled. This shows a delicate balance. Marriages were both business and bond, spiritual and practical. When the balance was broken, the Church had mechanisms to address it. Even among peasants, the principles of annulment mattered. Though fewer formal records survive, we know that villagers sometimes went to the local priest or bishop to request annulment when promises were broken or when coercion had played a role. The Church's goal was to protect individuals while maintaining social order, ensuring that marriages were both consensual and lawful. Annulments remind us that medieval marriage was not a simple, unchanging institution. It was shaped by law, religion, family, and individual circumstances. Behind the vows and ceremonies, there existed a careful system for addressing situations where the union failed to meet its legal or spiritual requirements. So, in the quiet villages and bustling noble courts, the potential for annulment added another layer of complexity. It acknowledged human limits, that not all unions could succeed, and that even within rigid rules, mercy and legal flexibility were possible. In this way, the medieval world balanced duty with practicality, obligation with fairness, and law with human experience, heirs and expectations. In the Middle Ages, one of the most important aspects of marriage, especially among the nobility, was the production of children. The birth of heirs, particularly sons, was not merely a personal matter. It shaped the future of families, estates, and even kingdoms. Children were considered both a blessing and a practical necessity. For noble families, a son was often the most desired child. Sons inherited lands, titles, and responsibilities. They carried on the family name and ensured that estates stayed within the lineage. Daughters were cherished, certainly, but their social value was often tied to their ability to marry strategically. In other words, sons secured the family's continuity, while daughters could be tools of alliance. Peasant families, however, had different pressures. While inheritance mattered, survival was the first priority. More children meant more hands to work the fields, tend animals, and help with household chores. In a world without modern tools or machines, labour was life. Families often hoped for many children, though not all survived infancy or childhood. Mortality rates were high, and the rhythm of medieval life was shaped by loss as much as by growth. The Church's perspective was intertwined with these social expectations. Marriage was meant for procreation, and sex was justified primarily by the goal of producing children. A couple who could not have children, especially sons, might face both private disappointment and public scrutiny. Yet the Church did not insist that every couple produce male heirs. Girls were recognized as God's gifts, and families were expected to accept them with gratitude, even if political or social plans had hoped otherwise. Sometimes, however, the inability to produce a child, or specifically a son, led to tension. Couples might try for years without success. Medical understanding was limited, and infertility was poorly explained. Social pressure could be intense. Among nobles, marriages might be arranged a second time, or women might be encouraged to remarry if a suitable heir could not be produced. yet the Church generally resisted annulments based solely on a lack of male children, emphasizing that marriage was a sacred bond, not just a method for producing heirs. Imagine a noble household in the late 13th century. The lord and lady have been married for 5 years, and though they love each other in quiet ways, they have only daughters. Guests and relatives whisper about the lack of a male heir, yet the couple continues their life together. They raise their daughters carefully, managing estates and maintaining alliances. The rhythm of their days is shaped by household management, farm oversight, religious obligations, and quiet moments together. Despite social expectations, life continues, and the value of each child is recognized, male or female. In peasant villages, the story is simpler yet equally human. Parents work side by side, hoping for children to help with planting and harvesting. Each birth is met with a mixture of joy and concern, knowing that survival is never guaranteed. Sons are often hoped for, but daughters are treasured, both for their presence in the family and for the labor they can provide as they grow. Life is pragmatic, shaped by work, faith, and small joys, and children are central to that rhythm. Interestingly, the Church also placed moral and spiritual expectations on parents, raising children in faith, teaching them prayers, guiding them toward virtue. These were responsibilities considered as important as inheritance. A family might produce many children, but if they failed in religious instruction, they failed in a sacred duty. Education for children varied by class, with nobles often providing tutors for sons and sometimes daughters, while peasant children learned practical skills in the household and fields. The pressure of heirs also intersected with marriage laws and annulments. While inability to produce a child rarely allowed for annulment, the inability to produce a male heir sometimes motivated families to seek other solutions. Remarriage, arranged unions, or adoption of heirs could occur in certain circumstances. Still, the sanctity of marriage was emphasized, reminding couples and families that duty and devotion were intertwined with practicality. The experience of raising children in the Middle Ages was immersive, from the first cry of a newborn to the daily work of teaching chores, prayers, and survival skills. Life was structured around preparation for adulthood. Parents, both noble and peasant, understood that children were the continuation of family, labor, and faith. They represented hope, legacy, and the future. Even the rituals surrounding birth were steeped in meaning. Midwives, family members, and priests often assisted. Baptism was not only a religious sacrament, but also a legal recognition of the child's place in the family and community. Gifts might be given, prayers offered, and the newborn carefully watched over. These rituals reinforced the connection between family life, community, and the divine. Ultimately, heirs and children in the Middle Ages reveal the intertwined nature of love, duty, and survival. Couples might marry for reasons of wealth, status, or alliance, yet their daily lives were profoundly shaped by the children they raised. Sons, daughters, laborers, and heirs alike were threads in the fabric of medieval life, binding families to their land, faith, and future. Marriage, then, was not simply a legal or religious act. It was a life lived in partnership, often guided by external pressures but shaped by internal affection. The hope for children, the care given to each birth, and the planning for the future remind us that even amid strict rules, human desire, love, and responsibility found a way to exist. And so, as we reflect quietly on the rhythm of medieval families, we can imagine the steady days of work, the prayers whispered for healthy children, and the careful attention to survival and succession. The weight of expectations was balanced by daily life, care, and small joys that carried families forward. Marital duties and expectations. In the medieval world, marriage was not only about companionship or the production of heirs, it also carried a set of expectations regarding daily life and responsibilities. These expectations were different for husbands and wives, and they shaped the rhythm of life in ways both subtle and profound. Understanding them helps us imagine the careful balance that couples maintained, navigating love, duty, and social obligations. For the husband, duties were often centered on provision and protection. He was expected to manage the household's land or trade, ensure that food and resources were available, and maintain the family's social standing. In noble households, this could involve overseeing large estates, negotiating alliances, or participating in political matters. In peasant households, the work was more immediate, ploughing fields, tending livestock, and ensuring that the family had enough to eat through harsh winters and unpredictable seasons. Yet, marital duties extended beyond economic provision. Medieval thinkers and the Church emphasized the husband's responsibility to provide not only materially, but also physically and emotionally. Sexual relations were considered part of this responsibility, tied to the production of heirs and the mutual care within the marriage. A husband's incapacity in this regard was taken seriously. In rare cases, if a man could not satisfy his wife or fulfill his marital duties, the marriage could be challenged or even annulled. This underlines how central these expectations were to the medieval understanding of marriage. For wives, duties were more varied but equally important. She was responsible for managing the household, which included food preparation, clothing, child-rearing, and sometimes overseeing servants or labourers. Noble women might manage entire estates when their husbands were away, coordinating agricultural work, collecting rents, and supervising staff. Peasant women contributed labour alongside their husbands, tending gardens, animals, and household chores. Every action reinforced the family's survival and prosperity. Sexual obligations were carefully framed. The Church insisted that sex was proper within marriage for procreation and bonding. Couples were expected to fulfill this duty while observing restrictions, such as abstaining during religious fasts, holy days, or when the wife was menstruating or recovering from childbirth. Despite these rules, desire persisted, and couples navigated these expectations in private. Medieval writers noted that pleasure could accompany duty, but it was always secondary to the sacred and practical purpose of marriage. Another layer of expectation involved loyalty and respect. Husbands were expected to treat their wives with care, while wives were expected to maintain fidelity and support their husband's authority. Social norms and religious teachings reinforced these roles, but everyday life often blurred them. Husbands and wives relied on one another, shared tasks, and created routines that sustained both family and household. Even small gestures, a shared meal, attention to the children, guidance in managing the household, were part of this quiet, ongoing duty. The medieval approach to marital duty also intersected with legal and communal oversight. Disputes over fidelity, failure to provide, or other breaches of duty could reach local courts or church authorities. These mechanisms were designed to maintain order and protect the rights of both parties, though access to justice varied by class. Noble families could call upon courts with resources and influence, while peasants relied on local lords or parish priests to mediate disputes. Despite the formalities and pressures, many couples found ways to navigate their duties with care and affection. Letters, poems, and domestic records show that mutual respect and concern were part of everyday life. Noble couples might exchange gifts or words of affection, while peasant families developed rhythms and routines that strengthened bonds. Duty did not exclude emotion. In fact, it often created the framework within which affection could grow. Imagine a typical day for a peasant couple. The husband rises early to tend fields, while the wife prepares breakfast and begins work in the garden. Children are guided through chores and lessons, small errands are run to gather water or firewood, and meals are prepared for the household. Through all this, both husband and wife are performing the duties expected of them, ensuring survival, maintaining order, and nurturing the family. At night, they rest together, fulfilling other responsibilities within the bond of marriage, all while planning for the uncertain days ahead. In noble households, the pattern is more complex, but similar in essence. A nobleman may spend the day in council, managing tenants and lands, while his wife oversees staff, negotiates household matters, and ensures that the estate runs smoothly. The marriage is both a partnership and a performance, combining public responsibility with private care. Even amidst wealth and privilege, the expectations of duty created a structured, rhythmic life that defined the couple's relationship. Marital duties also included education and moral guidance. Wives and husbands guided their children, instructed them in religious observance, and ensured that social and moral expectations were met. In this sense, marriage was a hub around which the household and community revolved. Success in these duties meant stability. Failure could lead to dispute, disgrace, or hardship. Ultimately, the medieval concept of marital duties reflects a careful balance. Marriage was sacred, practical, and deeply social. Each spouse had responsibilities that extended beyond themselves to children, family, and community. Sex, labor, management, and moral guidance were all part of the quiet work of sustaining a household. Through these tasks, love, respect, and practical care intertwined in ways both subtle and profound. In this way, we see that medieval marriage was not only a ceremony or legal arrangement, but a daily practice, a rhythm of care, work, and shared responsibility. The expectations were high, but they also provided a structure within which families could thrive. By observing these duties, couples built lives together, shaped households, and maintained the continuity of their communities. Love, affection, and companionship. When we think of the Middle Ages, it is easy to imagine rigid rules, strict hierarchies, and marriages dictated entirely by family or property. Yet, even within this structured world, love and companionship found their place. Life in the Middle Ages was a mixture of duty and human connection, and marriage, while practical, also offered opportunities for affection, care, and shared experience. Among nobles, the language of love was often formal and expressed in poems, songs, or stories of knights and ladies. These tales of courtly love influenced real relationships in subtle ways. While the ideal of courtly love emphasized admiration and devotion rather than physical intimacy, it encouraged husbands and wives to treat each other with respect, loyalty, and a certain politeness. Letters from noble couples showed gentle concern for each other's well-being, and small gestures, a gift, a reassuring word, or the presence at a bedside during illness were ways love was expressed. For peasants, love and companionship were more practical, but no less meaningful. Partners relied on one another to manage labor, raise children, and navigate daily life. Affection could be found in shared work, small conversations, or simple acts of kindness. A husband might help carry water or repair a roof. A wife might care for a sick child or ailing husband. These quiet acts were expressions of love embedded in the rhythm of daily life. Sexual intimacy, while heavily regulated by the church, could also be a form of closeness and comfort. Though couples were instructed to abstain on holy days, during fasts, or when the wife was menstruating or recovering from childbirth, private life allowed moments of tenderness. Some medieval writers even noted that sexual pleasure, when secondary to the duty of procreation, was not sinful. This suggests that medieval people recognized the human desire for connection, even within a framework of religious expectation. Marriage also provided emotional stability. The presence of a trusted partner offered support in times of difficulty, illness, or hardship. In peasant villages, this could mean sharing food when crops failed, helping with chores when one spouse was injured, or providing comfort during bereavement. In noble households, companionship could be more complex, but letters and household accounts reveal shared concern, planning, and coordination that required trust and understanding. Children, too, reinforced the bonds of love and companionship. Raising a family demanded cooperation and mutual support. Parents shared the work of teaching, feeding, and guiding their children, creating a rhythm of daily life that intertwined labor with care. Each birth, each milestone, each small success deepened the connection between spouses. The joy of a healthy child, the comfort of shared responsibility, and the experience of guiding young lives contributed to the emotional life of marriage. It is also important to remember that affection did not always follow social norms or expectations. In some noble marriages arranged for political advantage, couples discovered genuine care over time. Shared interests, daily routines, or the enjoyment of each other's company could develop into deep emotional bonds. Among peasants, love might precede marriage, or it might grow slowly through partnership and cooperation. In either case, companionship became a steady, sustaining presence. Despite social rules and legal structures, people in the Middle Ages had the capacity for tenderness, loyalty, and mutual care. Marriage was not only about contracts, dowries, or heirs, it was also about sharing life, experiencing moments of comfort, and building bonds that could support both routine and crisis. Small gestures, a meal prepared carefully, a child soothed in the night, attention paid to a partner's health or mood, were the threads that wove affection into daily life. Even in moments of conflict, affection could be present. Disagreements about labor, household responsibilities, or social obligations were inevitable. Yet couples often found ways to navigate these tensions, negotiating tasks, compromising where necessary, and maintaining respect. The rhythm of life required cooperation, and cooperation fostered connection. Imagine a small peasant household at dusk. The day's work is done, fields are ploughed, animals fed, and supper prepared. The husband and wife sit together quietly, sharing news of the day, tending to a child, or simply enjoying a few moments of peace. In this quiet routine, there is companionship. Love is not shouted or celebrated publicly, but it exists in steady, gentle ways. It is woven into the work, the care, and the shared life of the household. In noble households, the rhythm is different, but the principle is similar. A lady might oversee the estate, while her husband attends council or manages diplomatic affairs. Letters and messages pass between them, not only to coordinate duties, but also to convey care. Gifts or tokens of appreciation may be exchanged. These gestures are small, quiet, and deliberate, reflecting a form of companionship that suits the demands of status, responsibility, and societal expectation. Companionship in marriage, whether noble or peasant, also provided emotional resilience. Life in the Middle Ages could be harsh. Illness, famine, political instability, and the unpredictability of work all created stress. Having a partner offered a sense of security, someone who shared burdens and helped carry challenges. In this way, marriage became a source of comfort, even as it imposed duties. Finally, love and companionship remind us that medieval people were deeply human. Behind the rules, the dowries, the legal frameworks, and the religious guidance, there was space for tenderness, loyalty, and care. Marriage was structured and regulated, yes, but it was also lived, experienced, and felt. Couples found ways to express affection, support each other, and build a life together despite the constraints and expectations around them. In this gentle reflection, we can see that love in the Middle Ages was not absent. It was present quietly within the rhythms of work, family, and daily life. It was steady, practical, and patient. And perhaps, in its own way, it was just as enduring as the grandest vows or most elaborate ceremonies. Noble women and influence. In the medieval world, women's lives were often shaped by family, marriage, and societal expectations. But within these boundaries, some women, particularly noble women, found ways to exert influence. Their power was subtle, often indirect, and mostly exercised through relationships, household management, and social networks. Understanding this helps us see how medieval women navigated a world that limited their formal authority, yet still allowed room for clever negotiation, strategy, and care. Noble women, by virtue of their birth and marriage, often controlled aspects of estates or households. When husbands were away on military campaigns, in council, or visiting other lands, the wife might manage finances, supervise labourers, and make key decisions about property. This responsibility was real and tangible. She could decide when to hire or dismiss servants, which crops to plant, or how to allocate household goods. In some ways, her influence mirrored that of a modern manager, though it was always framed within the norms of her social role. Education played a role in enabling influence. Noble women often learned reading, writing, and sometimes foreign languages. They studied household management, the proper conduct of courtly life, and religious observance. Some even learned basic law or financial accounting. This knowledge allowed them to oversee estates competently and negotiate on behalf of their families. Through literacy, intelligence, and strategic thinking, a noble woman could shape the course of her household and, occasionally, her wider social world. The culture of courtly love also provided opportunities for influence. Stories of knights devoted to noble ladies, willing to risk everything for honour and admiration, created a social expectation that men should respect and serve women. While this did not grant full independence, it allowed women to exert soft power. They could advise their husbands, guide social decisions, and manage estates with some authority. The respect shown in these literary ideals sometimes translated into real opportunities for leadership. Marriage itself was another avenue for influence. Through negotiation of dowries, property rights, and household management, women could secure a degree of autonomy and control. They might retain rights to certain lands or revenues, ensuring their security and giving them leverage within the marriage. In cases of widowhood, these rights could be even more important. A widow might manage her late husband's estate until heirs came of age, becoming a de facto ruler in her own right for a time. Yet this influence was always bounded by social expectations. Noble women were expected to act with decorum, obedience, and loyalty. Their authority was rarely public or formalized. It depended on relationships, reputation, and the cooperation of others. A misstep could lead to scandal or loss of position. Thus, women exercised power quietly, strategically, and often indirectly. For non-noble women, opportunities for influence were far more limited. Peasant women had little control over land, finances, or formal decisions. Their influence was mostly within the household, shaping family life through daily management and care. They guided children, supported husbands in labour, and maintained the rhythms of domestic life. While their scope was smaller, it was no less essential. Without the careful management of peasants' wives, households and farms would struggle to survive. Religious life also offered women a measure of influence. Convents allowed some women, particularly those of noble birth, to participate in education, administration, and community leadership. Abbesses could manage property, guide other women, and engage with local authorities. The convent provided a rare space in which women could exercise formal authority, gain education, and participate actively in their communities. Even the language of love and affection could create influence. A wife who commanded respect, showed kindness, and maintained her household effectively could gain leverage within the marriage. She could guide her husband's decisions, advocate for children, and protect the family's interests. In this sense, influence was woven into the fabric of daily life, growing out of competence, tact, and care. Yet life was not without challenges. Women could face coercion in marriage, limited legal rights, and social pressures that restricted their independence. Even noble women, with all their advantages, had to navigate expectations about obedience, propriety, and reputation. A single misstep, whether in word, action, or association, could limit their ability to act. or diminish their influence. Still, the examples of medieval noblewomen show a remarkable adaptability. They balanced social expectation with personal agency, exercising authority where possible while respecting the rules of their world. Through household management, estate oversight, education, and social acumen, they shaped the lives of their families, communities, and sometimes even political events. We can imagine a noblewoman overseeing her estate while her husband is away. She meets with tenants, negotiates labour, and makes decisions about food and resource distribution. She reads letters from her husband, writes instructions, and perhaps even influences decisions about alliances or marriage for younger relatives. Each choice, each careful word affects the rhythm of life in the household and the broader social network. In comparison, a peasant wife's influence is quieter but equally vital. She guides the household, tends the animals, manages the small garden, and ensures children attend to chores and learn practical skills. Her influence is measured in the smooth running of daily life, the health and nourishment of the family, and the stability of the home. Without her care, the household's survival would be uncertain. Religion, culture, marriage, and household management all provided avenues for women's influence. Some were subtle, some overt, but all were rooted in the realities of medieval life. Women exercised intelligence, judgment, and care within a framework that often limited formal authority. In doing so, they contributed significantly to the continuity, stability, and social cohesion of their families and communities. By reflecting on the experiences of noblewomen and peasant wives alike, we can see that influence was not simply about wealth or status. It was about responsibility, skill, and careful negotiation within the boundaries of everyday life. Influence was built in small acts, instructing a child, managing a household, negotiating with a servant, advising a husband, or preserving family lands. These acts, repeated day by day, shaped the rhythm of medieval society. Even in the context of power, wealth, and social expectation, there was space for strategy, subtle authority, and quiet leadership. Noble women, in particular, exemplified how patience, intelligence, and care could be used to exert real influence, despite limitations imposed by social norms. They demonstrate that even within structured, hierarchical systems, human agency found ways to flourish. In the end, influence in medieval life was rarely loud or dramatic. It was measured, consistent, and deeply connected to the responsibilities and duties of daily life. From the care of children to the management of estates, from household decisions to social negotiation, women shaped the medieval world in ways that were often invisible to history, yet profoundly significant. The gap between ideal and reality. In the Middle Ages, love and marriage were guided by ideals, stories, and religious teachings, yet the reality often differed from these imagined patterns. Understanding the contrast between expectation and daily experience helps us see the complexity of medieval life, where romance, duty, and survival intersected in subtle and sometimes contradictory ways. Stories of knights and maidens, popular in courts and among the literate elite, painted love as noble, tragic, and sometimes unattainable. A knight might devote himself to a lady, performing heroic deeds in her honour, all while maintaining a code of chivalry and restraint. These narratives suggested that love was an art of admiration, sacrifice, and ethical conduct, rather than a practical arrangement. The lady in these tales often had the power to accept or reject attention, giving her a symbolic authority that could be absent in real life. Yet outside of literature, marriages were more pragmatic. Among nobles, alliances, property, and family expectations frequently outweighed personal feelings. Couples might meet only on their wedding day, or have interactions strictly managed by family advisors. While affection could develop over time, the initial union was rarely motivated solely by romance. Love had to grow within the structure of duty, and emotional bonds were secondary to social and political obligations. For peasants, the situation was different, but equally grounded in reality. Love and marriage were influenced more by practical concerns than by courtly ideals. Daily life required cooperation for survival, whether in tending fields, raising children, or managing household resources. While personal affection could play a role, it was often entwined with the necessity of maintaining a functional household. Companionship, shared labour, and mutual support became the forms of love most recognised and practised among the common people. This gap between ideal and reality was not necessarily negative. It reflected the diverse purposes of marriage in medieval society. Romantic ideals offered a vision of admiration, devotion, and ethical conduct. Practical arrangements ensured stability, survival, and social cohesion. Together, these two influences created a complex system in which couples navigated both personal feelings and external expectations. Even within noble households, the ideals of courtly love could shape daily life subtly. A husband might demonstrate respect and loyalty in accordance with chivalric teachings. A wife might exercise influence and authority quietly, reflecting the social expectations that reinforced admiration and service. These patterns allowed for emotional expression and mutual care, even within a framework of obligation and hierarchy. The Church also played a role in shaping both ideal and real experiences of marriage. Religious teachings emphasized fidelity, duty, and procreation, while moral instruction encouraged mutual respect and care. Priests and clergy provided guidance on acceptable conduct, sexual behavior, and the responsibilities of each spouse. Yet the Church's rules were interpreted and applied in different ways, depending on social status, local customs, and individual circumstances. Consent was a central issue in both ideal and reality. In literature, admiration was often voluntary, with a clear focus on moral and ethical devotion. In real life, consent could be complicated by family pressure, social expectation, and economic necessity. Noble women might have some leverage in household or estate management, but their initial consent to marriage was often shaped by family strategy. Peasant women might experience more freedom in choosing a partner, but even this choice was influenced by social and economic conditions. The consequences of this gap were visible in daily life. Marriages might be arranged, affection might develop slowly, and social norms could create tensions or constraints. Yet human resilience allowed couples to navigate these challenges. Love, respect, and companionship found ways to exist within constraints. Shared work, care for children, and the quiet rhythms of household life provided opportunities for connection, even when idealized romance seemed distant or unattainable. It is also important to consider the role of storytelling in shaping expectations. Tales of courtly love, heroic devotion, and noble service were widely circulated among the literate elite. These stories offered models for behavior, moral lessons, and social guidance. Even when reality did not match the narrative, the stories influenced how people thought about love, desire, and marriage. They created aspirations and provided frameworks for ethical conduct, shaping behavior subtly over time. In peasant communities, oral traditions, songs, and local stories also reinforced ideas about love and partnership. These narratives were more practical, emphasizing cooperation, fidelity, and the management of household life. They taught lessons about survival, mutual support, and the rhythms of daily labor, demonstrating that ideals and reality could take different forms depending on social class and circumstance. Through all this, the human desire for connection remained constant. Couples sought companionship, children, and mutual care. The social structures and rules shaped the form that love took, but they could not remove the basic impulses for attachment, care, and shared life. In this way, the contrast between ideal and reality reveals the flexibility and adaptability of medieval people. as they balanced aspiration with daily necessity. Consider a day in a noble household. The husband attends courtly duties, while the wife oversees the estate. They may exchange letters or gifts, showing respect and attention. Their lives are shaped by duty, social expectation, and strategy, yet moments of care, cooperation, and subtle affection are woven into their routine. Similarly, in a peasant household, shared work and mutual support create a quiet rhythm of life in which love and companionship exist alongside survival and labour. Ultimately, the gap between ideal and reality in medieval marriage illustrates a broader truth about human experience. While stories, literature, and religious teachings created models of devotion and virtue, the practical necessities of life dictated how people actually lived. Within this balance, affection, respect, and companionship found their place, demonstrating that, even in a structured and constrained world, human connection endured. By reflecting on this contrast, we gain a deeper understanding of medieval life. We see how ideals inspired behaviour, how practical needs structured households, and how people navigated the tensions between expectation and experience. It reminds us that love, marriage, and human connection are shaped by both the rules we follow and the bonds we create, quietly and persistently, in the course of everyday life. The challenges of consent. In the Middle Ages, marriage was influenced by social expectation, religious law, and family strategy. While stories of courtly love celebrated admiration and devotion, the reality of consent in marriage was often far more complex. Understanding how consent was regarded and practiced helps us see the tensions between social duty, personal choice, and human desire in medieval life. Consent was considered essential in the eyes of the Church. A marriage required the spoken agreement of both parties, often captured in simple phrases like, "Yes, I do." The Church recognized that for a union to be valid, each person needed to express a willingness to join the marriage, at least verbally. This concept gave individuals a measure of authority over their own lives, even when family pressure and social expectations were strong. However, the practical reality often differed from the ideal. Noble marriages were frequently arranged to secure property, alliances, or political advantage. Families might negotiate dowries, manage introductions, and oversee interactions in ways that constrained personal choice. A bride might have little say in whom she married, and a groom might be guided by family or social expectation rather than personal affection. While consent was technically required, it was not always freely given. Peasant marriages offered more opportunities for choice, though social and economic pressures still played a role. Communities were smaller and more tightly knit, and individuals might know each other from childhood or adolescence. Love, companionship, and practical cooperation often influenced marriages among common folk. Yet, even in these settings, families and neighbours could exert influence, and a marriage that disrupted social or economic expectations might face resistance. Women, in particular, faced challenges regarding consent. While the Church taught that consent must be freely given, societal norms often constrained women's choices. Pressure could be subtle, such as persuasion by relatives, or more overt, including threats to reputation, social standing, or security. In some cases, women were married to men who had harmed them, justified by social rules that prioritized family honor over personal safety. The tension between ideal consent and practical coercion highlights the limitations placed on women's autonomy. The Church attempted to mediate this tension. Canon law insisted that a marriage should not occur under duress, and that a constant man or woman could not be compelled into wedlock. Yet, these rules were often difficult to enforce, and the line between persuasion and coercion could be blurred. Local authorities, lords, or clergy might intervene, but outcomes depended on social rank, wealth, and influence. Many women had little practical recourse if their consent was pressured or disregarded. Consent was not only about the decision to marry, but also about ongoing expectations within the union. Husbands and wives were expected to uphold duties, treat each other with respect, and care for the household. The legal and religious framework aimed to protect both parties, though enforcement varied. A husband's failure to provide, protect, or satisfy his wife could, in rare circumstances, lead to separation or annulment. Conversely, a wife's neglect of duties, especially those tied to childbearing or household management, could have social consequences. The concept of consent extended to sexual relations as well. Church law dictated that sexual activity was permitted only within marriage and primarily for procreation. Couples were expected to observe rules regarding holy days, fasting, menstruation, postpartum recovery, and other times considered inappropriate for sex. While these rules were restrictive, they also defined the framework in which married couples could express intimacy. Consent, in this context, was understood as mutual agreement to fulfill both moral and practical obligations. Despite these restrictions, medieval sources indicate that couples often found ways to negotiate personal desires. Letters, household records, and literature reveal that love, companionship, and negotiation were present in everyday life. Husbands and wives learned to navigate boundaries, balancing duty, religious expectation, and mutual care. Consent was not simply a one-time declaration. It was woven into the ongoing practices of married life. Consider a young noblewoman preparing for an arranged marriage. Her family negotiates a dowry, a husband is chosen, and a wedding day is set. On the day itself, she gives her verbal consent in the presence of a priest. Yet the choice was shaped by family expectation, social rules, and economic considerations. In private, she may cultivate affection for her husband, seek to assert influence within the household, and negotiate daily life in ways that reflect both compliance and personal agency. In a peasant household, consent may appear more natural. A young woman and man who know each other decide to marry, sometimes with informal blessing from their families or lord. The spoken agreement formalizes the union, but the decision is guided by mutual understanding, compatibility, and practical considerations. Consent in this setting reflects both personal choice and social norms, blending affection with responsibility. The challenges of consent in the Middle Ages illustrate the complexity of human relationships under social, religious, and economic pressures. While the Church promoted freely given agreement, practical realities often constrained this ideal. Noble and peasant women faced different pressures, but both navigated limited autonomy in order to participate in marriage. Despite constraints, human agency found expression, whether through negotiation, influence, or the quiet cultivation of affection. Ultimately, consent in medieval marriage was a dynamic concept. It encompassed spoken agreement, social expectation, religious law, and ongoing negotiation within the household. The gap between ideal and reality shows that medieval people understood the importance of choice, even as they adapted to constraints and pressures. Couples worked within this framework to build lives together, balancing duty, affection, and personal agency. Reflecting on these complexities allows us to imagine the subtle, everyday negotiations that shaped medieval marriages. From arranged unions to personal choice, from noble households to peasant cottages, consent was woven into the fabric of life. It guided decisions, shaped behavior, and created opportunities for both constraint and freedom. In this way, consent was not merely a legal formality, but a living part of human relationships, quietly influencing the rhythm of daily life, the formation of families, and the experience of love.
Rules, restrictions, and religious guidance. In the Middle Ages, marriage and love were governed not only by social expectation and family strategy, but also by religious instruction. The Church sought to guide behavior, shape morality, and define acceptable expressions of intimacy. While some rules were flexible in practice, the influence of the Church was deeply woven into daily life, affecting everything from sexual behavior to household routines. Understanding these religious frameworks helps us see the rhythms and constraints that shaped medieval relationships. The Church emphasized that marriage was a sacred sacrament. It was more than a legal contract. It was a spiritual bond between two individuals, recognized before God. The essential component was consent, expressed verbally by both parties. Beyond this, the Church outlined expectations for conduct, fidelity, and sexual activity, aiming to maintain moral order and social stability. These rules created a framework within which couples lived, guiding both public and private behavior. Sexual activity was strictly regulated. Couples were permitted to engage in sex primarily for procreation. Any activity outside marriage, or for purely recreational purposes, was considered sinful. Even within marriage, there were numerous restrictions. Couples were expected to abstain on Sundays, Thursdays, and Fridays, as well as during feast and fast days. Sexual activity was also prohibited when women were menstruating, breastfeeding, or recovering from childbirth. This meant that lawful sexual relations could be infrequent, sometimes less than once a week, creating a structured rhythm to marital life. The rules extended beyond timing. Only male-female intercourse intended for reproduction was accepted. Masturbation, homosexuality, and other forms of sexual expression were considered serious sins, often subject to legal or ecclesiastical punishment. While modern readers might find these restrictions harsh, they reflected a consistent moral framework intended to channel human desire towards socially and religiously approved ends. Despite these limitations, the Church acknowledged that sexual pleasure was a natural part of marriage. Some religious writers emphasized that enjoyment was permissible as long as it remained secondary to the duty of procreation. In this way, medieval thinkers recognized the human capacity for desire while framing it within moral boundaries. Couples were encouraged to fulfill obligations to each other and to God, balancing personal feelings with spiritual and social responsibilities. Religious instruction also addressed the broader responsibilities of husbands and wives. Men were expected to provide for and protect their families, while women were responsible for managing households and caring for children. Both spouses were expected to observe moral and ethical conduct, supporting each other in daily life. These responsibilities were intertwined with spiritual guidance, creating a rhythm of behavior that aligned practical necessity with religious expectation. Education and literacy reinforced these teachings. Clergy, religious texts, and instructional manuals provided guidance on marriage, sexual conduct, and household management. Noble women, in particular, often learned these principles as part of their preparation for marriage, while peasant families received instruction through parish priests and community guidance. This instruction shaped behavior, informed choices, and reinforced the moral framework of medieval life. The Church also intervened in cases of dispute, coercion, or failure to fulfill marital duties. Legal and ecclesiastical authorities could annul marriages deemed invalid, dissolve unions where impotence was proven, or mediate conflicts over fidelity or household responsibilities. These interventions reflected the Church's dual concern with morality and social order. They also demonstrate that marriage was not only a private relationship, but a regulated institution with consequences for the wider community. Consider the daily life of a married couple navigating these rules. They would carefully observe holy days and abstain when required, balancing devotion with practical needs. A husband might focus on his responsibilities as provider and protector, while a wife managed household duties, guided children, and maintained the smooth operation of the home. Within these routines, affection and companionship could still flourish, but always within the rhythm established by religious and social expectation. Even when rules were strict, people found ways to express care, love, and connection. Small gestures, sharing a meal, tending to the sick, offering reassurance, were ways couples nurtured their bond within the constraints imposed by faith and custom. These quiet acts of love demonstrate that human experience cannot be fully constrained by rules. Companionship and care found their place even in structured and regulated settings. The Church's influence extended beyond the home into broader social life. Clergy guided communities, advised families, and mediated disputes. Religious festivals, feasts, and communal activities reinforced moral teachings and created shared experiences that shaped understanding of marriage, love, and duty. In this way, the rhythms of religious life intersected with daily routines, reinforcing social cohesion while guiding personal conduct. At the same time, medieval people exercised agency within these boundaries. Couples negotiated their own schedules, adapted rules to practical needs, and found ways to express affection privately. They learned to balance personal desires with moral instruction, creating a lived experience that blended compliance, adaptation, and human connection. The presence of rules did not eliminate intimacy or companionship. It simply framed the context in which these experiences occurred. The rules and restrictions of medieval life were not intended to eliminate love or pleasure. They were designed to guide human behavior, maintain social stability, and ensure that family life aligned with spiritual ideals. Within these structures, couples found ways to nurture affection, provide support, and create meaningful connections. The framework of duty and morality shaped daily life, but it did not prevent the growth of companionship, mutual respect, or love. By examining religious guidance alongside social and legal norms, we can better understand the lived experience of medieval marriage. It was a life structured by rules, but also filled with human moments of care, negotiation, and connection. Couples balanced duty with affection, compliance with desire, and public expectation with private intimacy. In doing so, they created households and families that were resilient, functional, and emotionally sustaining. Ultimately, the rules of medieval life show a careful attempt to guide behavior without erasing humanity. Within the framework of religious instruction and social expectation, people found ways to live, love, and care for one another. The presence of rules and restrictions shaped rhythm and structure, but human connection, agency, and affection remained central to the experience of marriage, demonstrating the enduring adaptability and resilience of human relationships. Control, passion, and the medieval body. As we continue exploring love, marriage, and daily life in the Middle Ages, it becomes clear that control over sexuality and desire was a major concern for both the church and society. Medieval thinkers, clergy, and legal authorities sought to guide human behavior, shape morality, and maintain social order, often focusing on the rhythms of the body, acceptable passion, and regulation of intimate life. Yet within this framework, people found ways to navigate desire, connection, and companionship, revealing the interplay between structure and human experience. The Church imposed a variety of rules to regulate sexual behavior. These included abstinence on specific days, restrictions during women's menstruation or postpartum recovery, and prohibitions on sexual acts considered unnatural or sinful. These rules were based on a combination of religious belief, moral philosophy, and concern for social stability. The aim was to channel desire toward procreation within the boundaries of marriage, preventing behaviors that could disrupt family, inheritance, or communal harmony. Despite this control, human desire persisted. Couples often negotiated these rules, seeking moments of intimacy, affection, and connection within the permitted framework. Private life allowed for flexibility. Couples could adjust schedules, express care through small gestures, and cultivate closeness within the rhythm of daily life. Sexuality was not absent. It was simply managed according to moral and practical guidelines. The regulation of the body reflected broader medieval attitudes toward control and order. Society valued hierarchy, obedience, and duty, and these principles extended to personal conduct. Just as lords exercised authority over land and labor, and families controlled marriages, religious authorities sought to govern bodies and desires. The emphasis on rules, fasting, and abstinence reinforced the idea that the body needed guidance, training, and limitation in order to live harmoniously within society. Yet control did not entirely suppress agency or human connection. Couples found ways to express intimacy, nurture bonds, and create comfort within these limits. A husband and wife might exchange kind words, provide care during illness, or share a quiet moment in the evening. Small acts of affection became ways to cultivate emotional connection, even when physical expression was regulated. These gestures illustrate that love and companionship could coexist with strict moral oversight. The concern with controlling passion also intersected with ideas about morality and virtue. Clergy emphasized that unregulated desire could lead to sin, social disruption, or personal harm. Instructional manuals, sermons, and moral treatises described the proper management of sexual energy, advising moderation, reflection, and devotion to family and faith. These teachings were intended to guide individuals toward behavior that supported both spiritual and social goals. Education and literacy helped enforce these ideas. Noble women and men learned principles of conduct as part of their upbringing, while peasant families absorbed guidance from priests and local traditions. The teachings emphasized balance. Human desire was natural, but it needed structure, responsibility, and moral oversight. Couples internalized these lessons, shaping daily routines, household practices, and marital behavior accordingly. Despite the focus on control, passion was acknowledged as part of human life. Some clerical writers admitted that sexual pleasure within marriage could be tolerated, provided it was secondary to procreation. In other words, desire was permitted, but duty remained primary. This subtle acknowledgement highlights the tension between moral expectation and human reality. The body's impulses were recognized, but framed within a system of guidance and moderation. The regulation of sexual behavior also reinforced social order. Control over intimacy, reproduction, and consent ensured the stability of families, inheritance, and the broader community. Rules about who could marry, when sex was permitted, and what acts were acceptable all contributed to predictable patterns of behavior, limiting conflict and maintaining authority. In this sense, regulation was not purely punitive. It was also functional, designed to structure life, strengthen households, and preserve social harmony. At the same time, people exercised flexibility within these boundaries. Couples adapted rules to personal circumstances, balancing moral instruction with practical needs. They negotiated schedules, shared affection discreetly, and built routines that allowed intimacy without violating social or religious norms. In doing so, they demonstrated that even under strict regulation, human creativity and connection found expression. Consider a peasant couple rising early to work in the fields. Their daily labor is strenuous, yet within the evening hours they may share conversation, care for their children, and tend to household needs together. Small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a comforting word, a shared laugh, express companionship and affection. Even when strict rules regulate sexual activity, emotional intimacy continues, sustaining the partnership and reinforcing bonds essential for survival. In a noble household, the rhythms are different, but the principles are similar. Couples navigate estate management, social expectation, and public appearance while maintaining private connection. Letters, gifts, and shared responsibilities become ways to express care. Even when physical intimacy is regulated, emotional intimacy strengthens the marriage. Affection, loyalty, and attention to each other's well-being provide stability, companionship, and quiet comfort. This interplay of control, regulation, and human desire reflects the broader rhythms of medieval life. Just as labor, social duty, and religious practice were structured, so too were marriage and intimacy. Rules and restrictions provided order, but within that order, human connection, care, and affection persisted. The medieval body, guided by social and moral instruction, was also a vehicle for love, companionship, and resilience. Ultimately, medieval people navigated a delicate balance. Desire and passion existed alongside duty and regulation. Companionship, emotional intimacy, and mutual care coexisted with religious expectation and social hierarchy. The framework of control did not erase connection. It shaped it, giving rhythm and structure to human relationships. Within this carefully managed space, love, care, and partnership continued to flourish, quietly sustaining the household, the family, and the community. By reflecting on these dynamics, we see that medieval life was both constrained and deeply human. Rules governed behavior, shaped morality, and maintained order. Yet within these rules, couples found ways to nurture affection, express loyalty, and experience connection. Control and passion were not mutually exclusive. Rather, they existed together, defining the rhythms of love, marriage, and daily life in the Middle Ages. Property, reputation, and the boundaries of love. As we examine medieval love and marriage more closely, it becomes clear that relationships were not only shaped by personal desire or affection, but were deeply intertwined with property, reputation, and social hierarchy. Families, lords, and the church exerted influence over daily life, creating boundaries within which love and marriage were practiced. Understanding these forces helps us appreciate how practical, social, and moral considerations governed human connection in the Middle Ages. Marriage was often a tool of economic and social strategy. Among the nobility, unions were arranged to consolidate land, secure alliances, or increase wealth. A single marriage could link powerful families, strengthen political influence, and protect inheritance. Dowries, gifts, and promises of land were carefully negotiated, sometimes long before the individuals themselves reached maturity. For noble children, the marriage process was guided as much by family interest as by personal choice. In this context, women's lives were particularly influenced by property and reputation. A bride's dowry might include land, livestock, or other valuable goods, making her a key participant in the family's social and economic planning. Maintaining her reputation was crucial. A woman perceived as dishonorable or disobedient could disrupt alliances, jeopardize inheritance, and affect her family's standing. Social norms and moral expectation reinforced the importance of careful conduct, creating a system in which reputation carried significant weight. Men also navigated social and economic pressures. A nobleman's marriage was not merely about companionship. It was about consolidating authority, managing estates, and fulfilling obligations to family and community. Failure to marry appropriately, or to ensure the legitimacy of heirs, could undermine social standing and disrupt political or economic plans. Both men and women were bound by a complex network of expectation, shaping choices and behavior in ways that extended far beyond personal preference. For peasants, property and reputation played different roles, but were no less important. While land ownership was limited, household management, labor obligations, and community reputation affected everyday life. Marriage often involved negotiation of labor, resources, and practical support. A couple's ability to work together, maintain the household, and contribute to communal tasks determined not only their survival, but also their social standing. In this context, love and affection were intertwined with practical responsibilities, creating partnerships based on cooperation as well as personal connection. The church reinforced these social priorities. Religious instruction emphasized the sacredness of marriage, fidelity, and proper conduct, while canon law regulated property rights, inheritance, and legitimacy of heirs. Clergy acted as moral guides, mediators, and arbiters, ensuring that unions followed social and spiritual rules. Marriage was both a personal commitment and a public contract, subject to scrutiny and expectation from both religious and social authorities. Women, in particular, navigated multiple layers of obligation. They were expected to manage households, bear children, and maintain family honor, all while exercising influence where possible. Noble women might oversee estates, advise husbands, or protect family interests. Peasant women guided daily life, supported labor, and maintained the smooth functioning of the household. In both cases, women's actions were constrained by expectation, yet shaped the rhythm and success of their families' lives. The boundaries created by property and reputation also affected personal freedom and expression. Consent, choice, and affection were often limited by social duty. Arranged marriages, family negotiation, and moral expectation dictated whom individuals could marry, when and under what circumstances. Yet within these boundaries, people found ways to cultivate love, companionship, and emotional connection. Small acts of care, shared labor, and household cooperation became expressions of partnership that could flourish alongside obligation. Reputation served as a social compass, guiding behavior in both public and private life. For women, preserving honor was essential to securing marriage, social standing, and family influence. For men, maintaining virtue, competence, and responsibility protected social and economic position. These pressures reinforced moral codes and social norms, yet they also created opportunities for agency, negotiation, and strategic action within clearly defined boundaries. Even in constrained circumstances, human connection remained resilient. Couples adapted to social, economic, and religious rules, finding ways to express affection, nurture children, and create functional households. Love was expressed in practical collaboration, shared responsibility, and mutual care. Companionship was cultivated through daily tasks, labor, and quiet gestures, demonstrating that even within limits, human relationships were rich, adaptive, and deeply meaningful. Consider the life of a noble woman managing her household. She supervises servants, coordinates labor for fields or estates, and ensures that resources are allocated fairly. She provides guidance to children, advises her husband on estate matters, and maintains social connections with other families. Her influence is real, though exercised within the boundaries set by property, reputation, and family expectation. Through skill, diplomacy, and care, she shapes the rhythm of daily life while maintaining honor and authority. In a peasant household, cooperation and shared responsibility define the experience of love. A wife and husband coordinate labor, manage resources, and support each other through the challenges of survival. Affection and companionship are woven into these daily tasks, creating bonds that sustain the household and community. Reputation is maintained through diligence, respect for neighbors, and adherence to social norms. Property may be minimal, yet its management, alongside reputation, shapes the couple's life and standing within the village. The interconnection of property, reputation, and personal experience reveals the practical realities underlying medieval love and marriage. While ideals, courtly stories, and religious teachings shaped aspirations and behavior, the tangible concerns of family, labor, and social expectation defined much of daily life. Love and affection were expressed not only through words or gestures, but also through competence, care, and the responsible management of resources and relationships. Ultimately, the boundaries created by property, reputation, and social expectation were not purely restrictive. They provided a structure within which people could exercise agency, cultivate partnership, and navigate daily life. Marriage and love were constrained by obligation. Yet within these constraints, couples found ways to express care, build companionship, and sustain family life. The rhythm of medieval existence was shaped by both duty and connection, reflecting a balance between societal structure and human experience. By examining the influence of property, reputation, and social boundaries, we gain a deeper understanding of medieval life. We see how practical considerations shaped relationships, guided behavior, and framed affection. Within these frameworks, love was not absent. It was expressed through responsibility, care, and shared life. The medieval household, whether noble or peasant, was a space where human connection persisted, quietly resilient and profoundly human. Tenderness within boundaries. Despite the strict rules, social expectations, and practical considerations that shaped medieval love and marriage, there were moments of tenderness and genuine affection. Even in relationships bound by duty, family interest, and religious instruction, couples found ways to nurture emotional connections, express care, and create shared lives that were meaningful, even if not always romantic in the modern sense. For many couples, affection grew gradually over time. A noble couple might enter marriage arranged by their families, meeting formally for the first time on the wedding day. At first, interactions could be formal and cautious, shaped by social expectation and the oversight of household stewards or advisors. Yet within the private spaces of home, behind the walls of the estate, these relationships often developed quietly. Shared meals, cooperative management of household affairs, and small gestures of kindness built bonds that were stable, functional, and emotionally sustaining. Peasant couples experienced tenderness in different ways, but no less poignantly. Their lives were intertwined through labor, survival, and daily cooperation. Working together in the fields, sharing tasks in the household, or tending to children, they cultivated a rhythm of life that allowed for intimacy within practical limits. Moments of care, helping with a task, sharing a comforting word, or supporting one another through illness, were subtle, yet powerful expressions of partnership and affection. Even when affection was present, the boundaries of social expectation shaped its expression. Religious instruction and moral codes framed appropriate behavior, regulating sexual activity, guiding household conduct, and emphasizing duty over desire. Love existed alongside these rules, expressed through gestures, attention, and support rather than overt romantic or physical passion. Tenderness was practical as well as emotional, woven into the routines and responsibilities of daily life. The rhythm of household life offered opportunities for care and companionship. In noble households, wives and husbands coordinated management of estates, advised one another, and exchanged gifts or tokens of attention. Private spaces provided moments for conversation, reassurance, or quiet reflection. In peasant homes, shared labor and domestic cooperation created a continuous flow of interaction that nurtured connection. Love was present in cooperation, mutual support, and the shared experience of survival. Children, too, shaped the experience of tenderness. Raising children was a central duty, and the bonds between parents were often strengthened through shared responsibility. A couple's affection might be expressed in teaching, guidance, or protection, highlighting the ways in which care extended beyond romantic or sexual relations. In this sense, love was both relational and functional, providing emotional stability while ensuring the survival and growth of the household. Letters, gifts, and small acts of attention also played a role, particularly among the nobility. Correspondence between spouses, or between lovers in courtly settings, allowed expression of thought, concern, and admiration within the boundaries of propriety. A gift of fabric, a carefully chosen token, or a word of praise could convey sentiment, maintain connection, and reinforce bonds. Even when the framework of marriage was formal or arranged, these small gestures added depth and warmth to relationships. The presence of tenderness demonstrates that human connection adapts to circumstance. Social expectation, religious rules, and practical necessity created limits, but within these limits, couples found creative and meaningful ways to connect. Acts of care, shared work, and mutual support became channels for affection, trust, and companionship. Even without the modern emphasis on romantic love, medieval couples experienced intimacy and emotional closeness that was quietly profound. Consider a couple living in a village cottage. Their days are long, filled with labor in the fields, tending animals, and managing household tasks. Yet in the evening, they sit together by the hearth, share food, exchange stories, or comfort one another after a difficult day. Affection is embedded in the routine of life, quiet, steady, and reliable. The rhythm of daily work provides structure, but it also offers space for tenderness to flourish. In a noble household, similar patterns emerge within a more complex social framework. A lady overseeing her estate may exchange guidance, concern, and counsel with her husband, while also coordinating the welfare of servants and children. Private moments of connection, attention, and shared decision-making nurture the partnership. The external pressures of status, expectation, and appearance exist, but within the domestic sphere, tenderness and affection are cultivated through cooperation, mutual respect, and care. The persistence of tenderness within these boundaries reveals the adaptability of human emotion. People learn to express care, cultivate intimacy, and nurture bonds even under constraints. Rules, duties, and obligations shape the form of affection, but they do not eliminate it. Instead, they encourage creativity, subtlety, and a steady rhythm of care that sustains relationships over time. The medieval experience of love and marriage was, therefore, both structured and human. Social, religious, and economic constraints created boundaries. Yet within those boundaries, couples found ways to experience connection, care, and companionship. Tenderness was not necessarily expressed in dramatic gestures or overt passion, but through practical cooperation, shared responsibility, and quiet attentiveness. It was present in daily life, shaping the rhythm of households, reinforcing family bonds, and providing emotional continuity. By reflecting on these moments, we gain insight into the depth and subtlety of medieval relationships. Love was adaptable, expressed in ways that fit within social, religious, and economic structures. Companionship, affection, and emotional connection existed alongside duty and expectation, revealing that even in a highly regulated society, human intimacy persisted. The rhythm of daily life became a medium for tenderness, showing that love, in its quiet and practical forms, was a sustaining and deeply human force. Desire and discipline. As we explore medieval life further, it becomes clear that desire existed alongside strict discipline. The rhythms of daily life, the expectations of the church, and the pressures of social and family duty created a framework in which human passion was carefully guided, yet never fully absent. Couples learned to navigate these boundaries, balancing longing, law, and love in ways that shaped the experience of marriage and intimacy. Sexual desire was acknowledged but regulated. The church emphasized that sexual activity was proper only within marriage and primarily for procreation. Pleasure, while recognized, was secondary to duty. Couples were expected to abstain on holy days, during women's menstruation, postpartum recovery, and other periods considered inappropriate. These rules, though strict, established a rhythm to marital life that structured both emotional and physical connection. Despite these boundaries, couples found ways to express affection and intimacy. Emotional connection, mutual care, and practical cooperation allowed desire to be experienced within socially acceptable channels. Acts of tenderness, attention, and shared responsibility provided opportunities for closeness. Desire was expressed subtly, through conversation, gestures, and shared labor, revealing the human capacity to adapt to constraints while maintaining connection. Discipline, in this context, was not purely restrictive. It provided structure, guidance, and predictability. Couples learned to coordinate their lives, balance household responsibilities, and observe moral and religious rules. The framework of discipline shaped behavior, but also created space for intimacy to develop in ways that were sustainable, secure, and socially recognized. Love and desire existed within these rhythms, quietly integrated into the fabric of daily life. Consider a peasant couple rising early for fieldwork. Their day is long and laborious, yet moments of care appear in simple ways. A helping hand, a comforting word, or shared laughter reflects the presence of desire and affection, even under physical exhaustion and social constraints. Desire is not absent. It is woven into the rhythm of life, experienced through shared experience and mutual support. In noble households, discipline took a more formal shape, but desire remained present. Spouses navigated social expectation, estate management, and public appearances, yet private moments allowed for connection. Letters, gifts, and quiet conversation became channels for emotional and physical expression. Desire was expressed tactfully, within the bounds of propriety, yet it shaped relationships and deepened bonds. Religious instruction provided both guidance and limitation. Clergy emphasized moderation, responsibility, and moral oversight, framing desire within acceptable parameters. Sexual activity, affection, and intimacy were understood as natural, yet they were expected to align with moral duty. Couples internalized these lessons, balancing human longing with social, legal, and spiritual expectations. The tension between desire and discipline created a dynamic rhythm in daily life. Couples adapted to rules, negotiated expectations, and cultivated intimacy within structured routines. Love, companionship, and affection were expressed through cooperation, care, and attention. Discipline did not eliminate desire. It shaped its expression, creating patterns that allowed human connection to endure alongside duty. Even in constrained circumstances, people found ways to experience joy, closeness, and mutual satisfaction. Desire was integrated into household routines, emotional bonds, and daily interactions. The management of passion reflected both constraint and creativity, demonstrating the resilience of human relationships. Couples balanced expectation with personal inclination, cultivating intimacy that was sustainable, meaningful, and deeply human. The regulation of desire also reinforced social order. By channeling passion toward marriage and procreation, the church and society maintained family stability, inheritance lines, and community cohesion. Couples learned to live within this structure, negotiating personal longing with social responsibility. The result was a pattern of life in which desire and discipline coexisted, shaping the rhythm of domestic and social existence. Consider the broader rhythm of medieval households. Labor, prayer, family responsibilities, and social engagement created a structured life. Within this structure, affection, tenderness, and desire found expression through small gestures, shared work, and attention to household and family needs. Human connection adapted to the environment, ensuring that relationships remained meaningful and sustaining, even when governed by rules. Ultimately, desire in medieval life was neither absent nor unregulated. It existed within a framework of duty, law, and religious expectation, shaping the experience of love and marriage. Couples learn to negotiate these boundaries, express affection subtly, and cultivate connection through cooperation and care. The balance of desire and discipline illustrates the adaptability of human emotion, revealing that even in a highly structured society, intimacy and human connection remained central. By observing how desire was experienced alongside discipline, we gain insight into the daily life of medieval couples. Affection and longing were integrated into routines, responsibilities, and social expectation. Love was expressed not only through words or physical intimacy, but also through gestures, cooperation, and shared effort. Desire was quiet, structured, and enduring, woven seamlessly into the fabric of life, reflecting the resilience and adaptability of human relationships. Divorce, annulment, and the limits of control. In medieval society, marriage was considered sacred and largely permanent, yet there were rare occasions when unions could be dissolved or declared invalid. These exceptions reveal the limits of social, religious, and familial control, showing that even in a highly structured world, the human heart and circumstance sometimes demanded flexibility. Understanding divorce and annulment provides insight into the complexity of medieval relationships and the nuanced ways people navigated law, duty, and desire. Divorce in the modern sense was largely unknown in the Middle Ages. The Church did not permit unilateral termination of marriage, emphasizing permanence, consent, and spiritual commitment. Marriage was a bond before God, making separation difficult and exceptional. Yet, the Church recognized that not all unions were valid from the beginning. Annulment was the mechanism used to declare a marriage null, as if it had never existed. These decisions were guided by religious law, moral reasoning, and practical consideration, balancing social order with human reality. One of the most common grounds for annulment was consanguinity, when a couple was too closely related by blood. The Church forbade marriage between close relatives, reflecting concern for both spiritual propriety and the biological welfare of offspring. If evidence emerged that a union violated these rules, it could be dissolved, freeing the couple to marry others. This demonstrates that even strict rules allowed for adjustment when circumstances required it. Another reason for annulment involved prior religious vows. If one partner had already committed to a religious life, such as becoming a nun or monk, the marriage was considered invalid. These cases reflect the Church's prioritization of spiritual obligations over personal or social desires. While such situations were uncommon, they show that even within rigid structures, exceptions were recognized when moral and religious duties conflicted. Impotence was also recognized as grounds for annulment, highlighting the centrality of sexual function in the institution of marriage. If a husband was unable to satisfy his wife or perform marital duties, a council could be convened to investigate the situation. If confirmed, the marriage could be dissolved, freeing the woman to remarry. This rare but documented practice underscores that the Church acknowledged practical realities, such as reproductive ability, in the administration of marital law. Divorce and annulment cases reveal that consent, capacity, and circumstance mattered, even when social and religious expectations were strong. While the majority of couples lived within the strict rules of marriage, these exceptions demonstrate that personal reality could override structure in extraordinary cases. The human heart, desire, and circumstance sometimes required that the law bend or adapt. Even when annulment or separation occurred, social and religious pressures remained. Couples were expected to maintain decorum, adhere to moral standards, and uphold family reputation. Divorce did not erase social consequence. It was carefully regulated to minimize disruption, preserve inheritance lines, and maintain communal stability. Yet within these constraints, the very existence of annulment shows that medieval society recognized the limits of control over intimate life. Consider the emotional and practical realities. A woman seeking annulment due to an unconsummated marriage might face scrutiny, counsel, and investigation. She would navigate legal and religious systems, family expectations, and community perception. Her experience would be structured, formal, and sometimes challenging, yet it also offered agency and relief when the marriage was fundamentally untenable. Similarly, men faced scrutiny if they could not fulfill marital duties, reflecting a shared responsibility to uphold both social and religious expectations. These rare interventions demonstrate that the legal and religious system, while rigid, was not entirely inflexible. Social, spiritual, and practical concerns intersected, allowing for human reality to influence outcomes. Couples were not entirely powerless. They could petition for resolution in extraordinary circumstances, revealing that even in a regulated society, the human experience retained room for adjustment. Annulment and rare forms of separation also reveal how deeply intertwined marriage was with social, economic, and religious structures. Unions affected property, inheritance, family alliances, and communal perception. By allowing exceptions in limited cases, the system maintained both authority and adaptability, ensuring that rules served society while accommodating extraordinary human circumstances. Within this framework, we see the tension between permanence and flexibility. Marriage was meant to be enduring, sacred, and socially stabilizing. Yet the law acknowledged that human limitations, whether biological, relational, or moral, sometimes required intervention. Divorce and annulment were mechanisms by which medieval society could balance duty, faith, and personal reality, revealing a subtle, practical understanding of human relationships. The rarity of these interventions underscores their significance. Most couples remain bound for life, navigating desire, duty, and social expectation within marriage. Yet the very existence of annulment illustrates that law and society recognized human complexity. Even in a world dominated by strict rules and hierarchical structures, the needs, realities, and limitations of the human heart could not be entirely ignored. Reflecting on these rare exceptions helps us understand medieval love in a nuanced way. Marriages were structured, constrained, and often shaped by external forces. Yet flexibility existed where human circumstances demanded it. Couples balanced law, morality, desire, and practicality, creating lived experiences that were simultaneously regulated and deeply human. Even when the system intervened, it did so with careful consideration, acknowledging that human lives, hearts, and relationships were not always simple. Ultimately, the existence of divorce and annulment illustrates a profound truth about medieval life. Rules, authority, and expectation shaped the rhythms of daily existence, yet the human heart remained central. Laws could guide, influence, and regulate behavior, but they could not fully control affection, desire, or the need for companionship. Exceptions, rare, structured, and carefully managed, demonstrate that even within strict frameworks, human experience was flexible, resilient, and profoundly human. By understanding these dynamics, we see that medieval marriage was a complex interplay of duty, law, desire, and adaptation. Rules guided behavior, yet they coexisted with human agency, emotional connection, and practical necessity. Divorce and annulment, though rare, reveal the limits of control and the enduring adaptability of human relationships, offering insight into the lived experience of love in a highly structured society. The medieval heart and the complexity of love. As we reach the final segment of our journey through medieval love and marriage, it is helpful to reflect on the full picture. The medieval heart, as people understood it, was not only the organ that pumped life through the body, but also the seat of reason, truth, and emotion. It was thought to speak honestly, to guide thought and action, and to reveal inner intention. Yet love in practice was rarely simple. Between family expectations, social hierarchy, religious law, and personal desire, the heart had to navigate a complex world. In noble households, love was intertwined with strategy, property, and status. Marriages were often arranged for political alliances, the consolidation of wealth, or the continuation of lineage. Couples might meet formally for the first time on the day of their wedding, yet within the private spaces of the household, relationships could evolve slowly. Emotional bonds developed through cooperation, shared responsibility, and the quiet gestures of daily life. Even in these structured marriages, tenderness, companionship, and mutual respect were possible. For peasants, love was often more practical, shaped by survival, labor, and shared experience. The demands of daily work, household management, and raising children created opportunities for emotional connection, even when material conditions were harsh. Affection was expressed through shared effort, small acts of care, and cooperation in household and field tasks. Desire, while regulated by social norms and religious instruction, persisted in subtle, enduring ways. Courtly love, romantic tales, and the ideals of chivalry provided a cultural framework that highlighted admiration, respect, and longing. Stories of knights and noble women, often tragic or idealized, reflected societal aspiration rather than reality. They offered a model for refined behavior, the cultivation of virtue, and the pursuit of honor, but they rarely mirrored everyday life. Yet these narratives were influential, shaping attitudes, inspiring subtle expressions of admiration, and occasionally giving women, particularly in noble circles, a measure of influence in their households. The church played a central role in defining the limits and possibilities of love. It regulated marriage, sex, and consent, providing structure and moral guidance. Sex was considered holy within marriage if directed toward procreation, and various rules governed when couples could meet in intimacy. Yet even within these restrictions, human desire, affection, and tenderness endured. Couples negotiated rules, adapted routines, and found quiet ways to express connection, showing the resilience of emotion under regulation. Consent, choice, and agency were complicated matters. Some marriages were arranged or forced, and women, in particular, often faced limited autonomy. Pressure and coercion could shape unions, and social expectation constrained personal preference. Yet even within these limitations, individuals found ways to assert influence, cultivate affection, and protect family or personal interests. The medieval heart navigated these tensions, balancing obedience, desire, duty, and affection. Sexuality, desire, and intimacy were both regulated and experienced. Rules guided behavior, but they could not erase human impulses. Couples balanced duty with longing, discipline with affection. Physical expression was often secondary to moral expectation, yet emotional connection and small acts of care allowed desire to be present in daily life. Tenderness, cooperation, and shared responsibility became channels for intimacy, creating bonds that were enduring, practical, and profoundly human. Divorce and annulment, while rare, highlight the limits of regulation. Even in a society that emphasized permanence and sacred obligation, exceptions existed when marriages were invalid, unconsummated, or otherwise untenable. These mechanisms show that law, authority, and moral expectation, though powerful, were not absolute. Human reality, the heart, desire, and circumstance, retained influence over the course of relationships. Throughout medieval society, love was a balance of ideals and realities. Courtly tales inspired admiration and virtue. Social and familial obligations structured unions. Religious law guided behavior, and practical considerations shaped the rhythm of daily life. Within this framework, couples cultivated tenderness, mutual support, and emotional connection. The medieval heart spoke truth, even when constrained by duty, expectation, or circumstance. The gap between idealized love and lived experience was wide, yet both were meaningful. While literature celebrated distant admiration, ritualized affection, and noble sacrifice, daily life required practical care, cooperation, and emotional resilience. The interplay between aspiration and reality, between desire and regulation, shaped the human experience in ways both subtle and enduring. Reflecting on this, we see that love in the Middle Ages was deeply human. Complex, constrained, adaptive, and full of quiet tenderness. Couples navigated a structured world while preserving connection, companionship, and intimacy. Rules shaped the rhythm of life, but within those rhythms, the heart found space to speak, to care, and to endure. In the end, the medieval heart, though constrained by law, family, and moral expectation, remained capable of deep feeling, subtle affection, and enduring partnership. Love was never simple, yet it persisted. It was expressed in cooperation, tenderness, mutual care, and quiet gestures as much as in words, ritual, or physical intimacy. The lessons of the past remind us that human connection adapts, survives, and endures, even in worlds shaped by obligation and hierarchy. As we conclude this journey, imagine the rhythm of daily life in medieval households. The quiet exchange of care, the steady work of survival, the moments of connection between spouses, parents, and children. Even in a world of strict rules, social expectation, and structured life, the heart found ways to speak, to connect, and to love. And now, as you listen and drift toward rest, consider the enduring capacity of the heart. To feel, to adapt, and to sustain relationships quietly, faithfully, and deeply, across time and circumstance. Resting with the medieval heart. And so, we have wandered through the quiet corridors of medieval love and marriage, observing the rhythms of daily life, the gentle tug of duty, and the subtle expressions of tenderness that persisted even in a structured world. We have seen how the heart was believed to speak truth, guiding thought, action, and feeling, and how people navigated the boundaries of family, faith, and society while still finding moments of care, connection, and affection. Imagine yourself now, sitting beside a softly glowing hearth in a small medieval cottage, or walking quietly through the stone halls of a noble household. The bustle of labor and expectation surrounds you, yet in the calm moments, shared meals, small gestures of kindness, quiet conversation, you feel the enduring presence of human connection. The medieval heart, though bound by rules and expectation, found ways to speak, to care, and to sustain relationships in the quiet rhythm of daily life. As you let these images settle, allow yourself to drift with the gentle patterns of history, feeling the slow passage of time and the small, persistent acts of love that threaded through centuries. You have glimpsed a world both different and familiar, a world where human hearts adapted, endured, and quietly shaped life, even amidst constraint. If you enjoyed this journey through the medieval heart, and would like to continue traveling softly through history's hidden stories, consider subscribing to Boring History for Sleep. Each week, we explore the rhythms of past lives, the quiet truths of daily existence, and the tender, human stories that history often keeps just beneath the surface. Subscribing will ensure you never miss a moment of calm, immersive history designed to help you relax, dream, and drift into gentle sleep. So now, take a deep breath, let the echoes of the medieval world settle around you, and rest. The heart, timeless and resilient, continues to speak, even as you drift softly into the quiet of your own dreams.